The idea of an Israel lobby used to belong to the fringes of conspiratorial thought, or at least that's what liberals wanted you to believe. But since Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza began 23 months ago, it's become almost impossible to deny that protecting Israel, no matter what, is, for some reason, part of the national interest of many countries in the West, and not least of all the UK and the United States. In fact, sometimes Israel's interests appear to outweigh the self-interest of our own governments. Here's one example from this week's Private Eye. Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms firm, is a key cog in the Israeli war machine, is close to winning a £2 billion contract that would make it a strategic partner of the Ministry of Defence, working on the training of 60,000 British soldiers every year. Elbit Systems UK, its British arm, is bidding for the Army Collective Training Service contract. The chosen bidder will work with the MOD to transform military training through digitisation, simulation, and a different relationship with industry, and by changing how and where the military trains. And the article goes on to say this. Many defence giants put in bids, but in February the MOD reduced the bidders down to two, Elbit and Raytheon. The MOD paid the companies £2 million each to develop their bids. The development period was supposed to run until mid-August, meaning the final decision is imminent. The article concludes with this. Elbit has certainly done its best to get inside the track with the ministry, appointing two top former MOD figures to its UK board of directors, to Simon Bolam, who made the move in June, CI 1651, and to Mark Puffley. The firm has already had similar contracts with the MOD. Since 2023, it has run Project Vulcan, a £57 million 10-year contract of simulation-based training for tank crews. But the new deal would be a significant step up, both in value and in its relationship with the MOD. The Eye asked the MOD if it would be appropriate to give such a company so involved in the Gaza war such a major contract, but it did not respond. Okay, so let's just get this straight. Early in July, so just 7 weeks ago, MPs voted overwhelmingly to prescribe domestic direct action group Palestine Action. But during court proceedings, it emerged that Home Secretary Yvette Cooper had been advised to prescribe Palestine Action in March this year, not because the intelligence services thought it was a risk to human beings, but because of the damage it had to property it had inflicted on, scroll up, let me start the whole paragraph again. Sorry about that. But during court proceedings, it emerged that Home Secretary Yvette Cooper had been advised to prescribe Palestine Action in March this year, not because the intelligence services thought it was a risk to human beings, but because of the damage to property that it inflicted on, amongst other sites, Elbit factories and offices. But according to Private Eye, it was only a month earlier, that is February, that Elbit was selected as one of the finalists for a £2 billion tender from the Ministry of Defence. In March, Declassified reported that 3 officials from Yvette Cooper's Home Office secretly met with Elbit officials in December 2024, with both sides agreeing that a recording of the meeting should never be released. And in June, Declassified UK reported on how Elbit lobbied the Home Office in January, pushing for a retrial of Palestine Action's co-founders after charges against them were dismissed. That retrial was granted. Kieran, certainly does seem like the Israeli lobby is very, very real, doesn't it?
First of all, make no mistake, the Israel lobby is Israel's last refuge, right? And that's why it's so bloody important to Israel. When the lobby dies, Israel dies. For a very, very long time, the lobby did not have to exist to the extent that it does. For a long time, Israel was able to rely on propaganda, on what they called Hasbara, which was a way of explaining Israel's narrative to the world. And it was bloody successful. The sort of hearts and minds strategy, which was designed first to kind of, I don't know, erase Palestinians from the face of the earth, pretend Palestinians don't exist, that they're not actual people, or it's not a category of people. And the second thing, to project the idea that Israel was this kind of innocent, idealistic, romantic place forged from the ashes of the Holocaust. And Hasbara was incredibly successful, and it was successful not just because it sort of accidentally tapped into all sorts of sensibilities, but because it was bloody well funded. I think that there's a strong case to be made that if you look at spending on Israel's international PR machinery or apparatus, is actually of a similar order of expenditure to what it was spending on its secret nuclear weapons program. Anyway, that all fell apart. That all fell apart from the 1980s onwards for various reasons. I mean, I've said it before, Palestinians could have had a Nelson Mandela, or we could have had a Martin Luther King, or we could have had nothing we could have done could have conscripted for a pro-Palestine sentiment more than the Israelis themselves, than Israel itself, and the way that it's basically colonized, in the process of colonizing, conducting itself in relation to Palestinians and its treatment of Palestinians. So that, in conjunction with the technological revolution and the ability of Palestinians to cut through Hasbara's bullshit in real time via camera phones and social media and so on, has basically destroyed the romantic myth that Israel was once able to rely on. And why is this relevant to the lobby? Because the resources that were once kind of concentrated in those areas, the hearts and minds and the kind of manufacturing consent areas, there's a lot of evidence very clearly was shifted into the Israel lobby around the early 2000s as the kind of romantic myth started to unravel faster and faster, right? And so what we have now is this beefed up lobby on steroids. The Israel lobby's always existed. It existed before the creation of the State of Israel. Originally, it was conceived by people like David Ben-Gurion, but later Zeev Jabotinsky and Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, to convince European Jewry that its real home lay not in Europe, but in Ottoman-controlled Palestine, right? That was the original purpose of the lobby, and that shaded into Hasbara. Its methods were coercive and, manufacturing consent based. But the extent to which the lobby exists now, and the extent to which it has its teeth into institutions in the West, is unprecedented. And I think I'll end on this, Helena. I think it explains why we sort of see this gulf between what the public wants, on the one hand, about the genocide and about the treatment of Palestinians and about Palestinian statehood and about, alliances with Israel. On the one hand, there's sort of the Western public opinion on that. And on the other hand, there are institutions which seem to poorly reflect what polling data tells us about public opinion on those matters. And that is the lobby. That's explained by groups like APEC, UK Lawyers for Israel, and many, many others we could name, sinking their teeth into institutions and having a tremendous amount of influence. And for that reason, our powerful governing institutions, seem to be kind of crippled or in a state of stasis where they will not shift to reflect public opinion on Israel's genocide and slaughter in Gaza. And I think, that's part of the plan, is to make us all feel like we're going completely insane, because it doesn't matter how bad things get. It doesn't matter about how bad the images we see are. And it doesn't matter what our direct actions are, or the number of people on the street, etc. The institutions do not shift. They do not shift. We might have more rhetoric. We might have more window dressing from Keir Starmer and like David Lammy, but nothing changes. Licenses for weapons don't get suspended. Diplomatic cover doesn't recede. Ambassadors don't get expelled, etc., etc. That's the interference of and the influence of the lobby.
Exactly. Like when you're looking at the kind of whole Labour history for the last kind of 5 years, right? The one heuristic that you could continually see them espouse in terms of policy was what polls the best, right? We don't actually care about having a particular ideology. We're just going to go where the public is. We'll triangulate around public opinion. Apart from one thing, which is Israel and Palestine. Right? They refuse to triangulate around this and follow public opinion, which has been solidly pro-Palestine for ages, right? Since like November 2023, it sharply changed as soon as the genocide began in Gaza. And yet for some reason, it's this one issue where Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney haven't followed public opinion. And it explains it very easily if you understand that there is one higher power other than public opinion that they speak to, which is the interests, the material interests of the people who lobby them, such as the Israeli state. Now, it isn't only Novara media and other outlets like Declassified that are keen on exposing the Israel lobby. Over the Atlantic, left-wing journalists have long been doing the same in the United States. But now the right is joining the party. Former Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly nowadays has her own YouTube show, And on a recent episode, she was joined by Republican Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, no relation. That's when Israel's influence on US politics came up.
So one you didn't mention, but I think is also in there, is AIPAC.
Yes.
We should talk about that because it's the Israeli, pro-Israeli American group.
Yes.
And they are also very good about recruiting politicians early on in their careers. Mm-hmm. And they, like those other groups you mentioned, are deep-pocketed and would love to buy your vote.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're becoming more controversial because people like you are sort of saying, you don't own me. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of politicians to my left and my right, and literally to your left and right, because the Democrats and Republicans who have been purchased, who now may not have the freedom to speak as openly about their thoughts on this. And I think this audience knows, and I know where you stand too on Israel and all that, but I've been very pro-Israel, and I've been very defensive of their right to defend themselves in this nightmare.
Of course.
And I've been very defensive of American Jews on campuses who are just being harassed. It's ridiculous.
Of course.
But I have absolutely no skin whatsoever in defending any lobbyist group, including AIPAC.
Right.
So I would love to know what they do to get the loyalty of politicians, because I will say I have had multiple reach outs to me, both from friends and from connected people in DC, begging me to go to Israel with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have said no every time.
Now that is when MTG described her own experiences.
I find it fascinating that you're getting asked more and more and more. I've been asked more and more and more. Well, you're a person of very big influence. You've got a big voice. You've got a large audience. They also take a lot of influencers. They invite tons of influencers.
Many of whom have invited me. Like, we're all going together, and will you come? Like, they seem to be coming at me from a number of ways, which only really kind of raises my hackles. Like, I'm not going. I'm going to stay right here. I can cover this conflict from here, and I don't wish to be wooed by any side. I actually don't wish to be
persuaded. Have you been invited by any other foreign country?
No.
Okay, that's the part, right? So we have tons of lobbyists foreign countries lobbyists that come to Washington, D.C. Pretty much every country has some sort of representative. They have an ambassador they send to Washington. It's naturally in their interest. We can understand that. They also are required to register under FARA. It's a law. They have to register as a foreign agent, a foreign lobbyist. That is required. It's extremely important. Here's the difference with AIPAC. AIPAC is not registered under FARA, under this law that requires anyone coming to lobby a member of Congress or a senator or department of the government and the federal government on behalf of another country. So AIPAC argues, but we're Americans. Yes, they are Americans, but they are coming to Congress and to the federal government asking on behalf of the country of Israel.
Taylor Greene also went into AIPAC's relationship to people in the media.
AIPAC takes influencers. They take really big people like you. They want you to come over there. They want to pull you in because they want to pull you on their side. And why is that? Okay, for members of Congress, every single year, annually, Israel receives, and we have to vote on it. It's a yes or no vote, $3.8 billion in funding for Israel. Now, what does that money mean? Well, they'll say, this is for Israel. It's them to be able to defend themselves. They're the only democracy in the Middle East. Yep. They're constantly under attack. They're surrounded by their enemies who wants to annihilate them.
That's all true.
Sure, we're not arguing those points. However, let's flip over and look at, what does this mean? Number one, Israel is doing so well with their economy, and I'm excited for them. This is a big deal. I wish we were doing this good. We're $37 trillion in debt. Israel is less than $400 billion in debt. Less than. If you're an Israeli citizen, you have government-funded healthcare and you have government-funded college. So why is America having to give Israel $3.8 billion? If they're doing so great and they're funding healthcare and college, and their government is their economy is doing so well and their tax revenue is so good that they're less than $400 billion in debt, why is dead broke America having to send $3.8 billion? Well, then they argue back and they go, oh, but this helps America's economy. Well, how is that? Tell me how it helps. Okay, well, because we buy money from your defense contractors. Although guess what? This is really interesting. We give a ton of money to all these foreign countries. And if it's military aid, they're required to purchase weapons from our defense contractors. Except Israel is the only one with an exception. They don't have to buy from our American defense contractors. They can use that money to buy from Israeli defense contractors.
Now, let's make it very clear here. Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't some person who's got like a secret inside track who knows what's up. She's somebody who talked previously about quote unquote Jewish space lasers. I think she's pretty anti-Semitic personally. But in terms of what she's talking about there and all of the clips that we've seen, right, is that even somebody who I don't think is particularly perceptive can look at something incredibly simple like America gives lots of its taxpayers' money to a country that clearly doesn't need it, so they get government subsidies whilst Americans don't, and that the interests of that foreign power don't have to register in the same way as other people do in terms of other countries under FARA. Like, it just... If someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene can see this, right, how much do the rest of the political establishment in America think that the population of America is just completely stupid, that they can't see this too? And the people amongst the American right are starting to wise up on this, because Marjorie Taylor Greene, along with people like Tucker Carlson, et cetera, they're the true believers in the America First movement, right? They're the true believers. And some basic heuristic, like, we should be spending American money on Americans rather than on the military capacity for a state half across the other side of the world, right? Despite the fact that, of course, there are American imperial interests in the region, clearly she's not smart enough or perceptive enough to understand the geopolitics that's at play here. But on a basic level, she can at the very least see that there is this exception. There is this exception specifically when Israel is concerned. And if she can see it, and the population can see it, then everybody else in DC must think that the population are absolutely idiotic, that they think that they can pull the wool over people's eyes on this kind of stuff. Now, what Taylor Greene describes there is perhaps the most special relationship that exists on the planet, facilitated not only by politicians, but by the US media, to the detriment, it would seem, of even the US's own national interests. And last night, some of our own media played their part in trying to repair an increasingly broken relationship between the British public and Israel's leadership. The Trigonometry podcast aired their interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in which they asked him the softest of questions with almost zero pushback against his answers. Now, we had planned to cover that interview today, but honestly, it was so boring, so predictable, it's really not worth your time. It was pretty much a perfect copy of every interview we've seen with Netanyahu on Western mainstream media since Israel began its assault on Gaza, except with slightly more annoying hosts, shall we say, in my personal opinion. Kieran, what did you make of those clips that we just saw there? And what do you think is going to be the political consequences if people like MTG are cottoning on to the reality of the lobby?
Well, just briefly, first of all, I mean, Netanyahu doesn't do an interview unless he thinks it's going to be a soft soap. For all of his, I mean, for a butcher, he is remarkably pusillanimous, remarkably cowardly and spineless as an individual. And the chaps that run Trigonometry, they like to think that they're crusaders of free speech and, you know, robust debate and all of that. And actually, what they are is propagandists with a very clear worldview, and they go soft on those people that advocate for that worldview or embody it, and they go hard on people that they fundamentally disagree with. It's, I think, a charade, and one that befits somebody like Netanyahu very well. So on the split on the right in American politics these days, that seems to be moving from hairline fracture into full chasm, I think it was inevitable. It was inevitable because, you know, I don't want to sort of simplify things too much or be kind of crude about it. But to an extent, Israel has always been a colony of transatlantic kind of interests, right? And that's not to say that Israel, you know, the problem with that thesis, I think, is that my problem with it anyway, is that it exculpates, it forgives Israel and Israelis too much. It kind of removes all their agency and says, these guys are just a satellite state of the US and Britain, and those guys are the real ones. But of course, Britain, France, the United States have an enormous amount of blood, Palestinian blood on their hands. They're enormously responsible for what's happened over the past 100 years. But I also think it's important to pay attention to the kind of, internal dynamics of Israeli society and of Zionism as an ideology, as something which emerges as a particular thing at a particular time. Right. Now, I'm going all over the place, but the reason I'm doing that is to show that it's complicated. Nonetheless, Israel, to an extent, has always been a geostrategic colony of Western imperial interests, and the United States first and foremost. And I think the thing is with that, right, is that it means that Israel is always going to be, to a completely unique, and I would argue unprecedented degree, reliant, among nation states at least, reliant on external benefactors, the US being first and foremost. If you need 3.8 billion quid a year in aid and giveaways from another country in order to survive, then you're in a very serious state indeed. And it was also interesting hearing Marjorie Taylor Stone saying, "Verily, 400 billion in debt. We're 37 trillion or whatever it is." So I think ultimately this was always going to happen. This split between the so-called libertarian right, if you like, Tucker Carlson's of the world, and the kind of neocons embodied by the Douglas Murrays of the world. It was always going to happen because Israel has kind of bound into its structures of survival a down payment of X number of billions every year from America. And that's always going to give kindling to politicians in America, especially if, or not politicians, commentators and some politicians, especially if the new movement du jour of the right is Make America Great Again, and its strapline is America First. I think eventually some people will start to say, follow the money, why is it going out there and why isn't it staying at home? So, I'm here for it. I mean, I think you're right. I think anti-Semitism, unfortunately, for some of these people, certainly Candace Owens, is very clearly one of the motivating factors. Nonetheless, desperate times make for strange bedfellows. I'm not saying that we, ever march or be in the company of anti-Semites, but I'm saying that the sooner this whole wretched relationship between the American right and Israel falls to pieces, the better.
Before we move on to our final story, a reminder that our merch store sells books. Find all your favourite authors at shop.novaramedia.com, including our own Aaron Bastani and Ash Sarkar. And if you enjoyed our recent Downstream in Real Life with historian William Dalrymple, you can also get his book, The Golden Road, for just $12.99 right now. If you want to find out, in the most fascinating and beautifully readable way, how ancient India changed the world, visit shop.novaramedia.com.